At first, it seemed like a disciplined, even strategic move. Companies cut jobs, reduced costs, and framed it all as a push toward efficiency. And on the surface, it made sense. But now, something more complicated is unfolding. Some of those same companies are quietly bringing people back, not out of generosity, but out of necessity. The layoffs, it turns out, created gaps they didn't fully anticipate. In this video, we'll unpack why that reversal is happening, what shifted behind the scenes, and what it reveals about the true state of work today. Let's get into it. A lot of companies didn't cut jobs simply because business was collapsing. In many cases, the decision came from a different kind of pressure. Some were trying to reassure investors, signaling discipline and cost control. Others were following a broader trend, reacting to what competitors were doing rather than what their own situation demanded. And some genuinely believed they could streamline operations doing more with fewer people, leaning on efficiency as a strategy. On paper, that logic holds together. Reducing headcount lowers expenses, improves margins, and creates the impression of a leaner, more focused organization. It sounds precise, almost surgical. But reality tends to be less controlled. When experienced employees leave too quickly, what disappears isn't just payroll. It's institutional knowledge, the kind that isn't written down but built over years of doing the work. It's the informal networks that keep communication flowing. It's the speed that comes from familiarity, and the stability that comes from having people who understand not just what to do, but how and when to do it. At first, those losses aren't always obvious. The numbers may even look better for a while, but over time, the gaps begin to surface. Projects slow down, mistakes increase. Coordination becomes harder. What once felt smooth and predictable starts to feel uneven. And that's when the real cost becomes visible. Because efficiency isn't just about cutting resources, it's about maintaining the capacity to perform. And when that balance is disrupted, the system doesn't immediately collapse. It simply becomes less effective, one small strain at a time, until the impact can no longer be ignored. After the layoffs, many companies began to notice something they hadn't fully accounted for. They had cut deeper than they intended. At first, the changes seemed manageable. Teams adjusted, responsibilities shifted, and operations continued. But over time, the strain became harder to ignore. Projects that once moved steadily began to slow down. Teams found themselves stretched thin, juggling more responsibilities than they could realistically handle. Customer service, often the first place where pressure shows, started to decline. Response times grew longer, and the quality of interactions suffered. Deadlines, once predictable, became uncertain and increasingly difficult to meet. For those who remained, the burden quietly intensified. In some cases, employees were effectively doing the work of 2 or even 3 people. And while that might hold for a short period, it isn't sustainable. Fatigue builds, mistakes become more frequent, and morale begins to erode. That's the point where the problem shifts from manageable to costly, because at that stage, the company is no longer truly saving money. The initial reduction in payroll is offset by losses that are less visible but far more damaging. Time is lost as processes slow down. Quality declines, affecting both products and customer trust. Momentum, the steady forward movement that drives growth, begins to stall. And in business, those losses can outweigh the savings. Missed opportunities, weakened relationships, and declining performance often carry a higher price than the salaries that were cut. What once looked like a disciplined decision starts to reveal itself as a miscalculation, with consequences that ripple far beyond the balance sheet. This is where the situation takes an interesting turn. Many companies are now quietly rehiring people they previously let go, not as a gesture of goodwill, but as a practical response to problems they didn't anticipate. Those former employees carry something that's difficult to replace: familiarity. They already understand the systems, the workflows, and the unspoken dynamics of the organization. They know where the pressure points are, how decisions are made, and how to navigate the day-to-day complexity. That kind of knowledge doesn't require onboarding, it translates into immediate usefulness, and that changes the calculation. Bringing in entirely new hires may seem like a fresh start, but it comes with a hidden cost. Training takes time, integration takes patience, and during that period, productivity often lags. In contrast, rehiring someone who has already operated within the system allows companies to recover lost ground much faster. It's not just about convenience, it's about speed and efficiency under pressure. Companies facing delays, declining quality, or operational strain don't have the luxury of waiting months for new employees to fully adapt. They need people who can contribute almost immediately. In that sense, former employees become valuable again very quickly. What once seemed like a cost-saving decision now reveals its limitations, and the fastest way to stabilize operations is to bring back those who already know how things work. So instead of building from scratch, companies are retracing their steps. Not because it was part of the original plan, but because it's often the most practical way to repair what was disrupted and to restore a level of stability that was lost in the process. This trend reveals something deeper than it first appears. It challenges the assumption that layoffs are always a sign of strength or careful strategy. In many cases, they are closer to short-term reactions decisions made under pressure, aimed at immediate results rather than long-term stability. And when the real work begins to suffer, when output slows and problems multiply, companies often find themselves reversing course. That reversal is telling. It suggests that efficiency, when pushed too far, can undermine the very performance it was meant to protect. What looked like discipline begins to look more like overcorrection. It also highlights something equally important. Experienced workers still carry significant value. In moments of strain, companies don't simply look for the lowest cost option. They look for the person who can step in and solve problems without delay. Someone who understands the system, who requires minimal guidance, and who can restore momentum almost immediately. That kind of value isn't easily replaced, and it doesn't always show up clearly on a balance sheet. But when it's gone, its absence becomes obvious very quickly. And this shift changes how people should think about job security. It suggests that security isn't just about staying employed, it's about being essential. About having skills, knowledge, and experience that make you difficult to replace when things become uncertain. Because in the end, companies may cut quickly when pressure rises. But when the consequences of those cuts begin to unfold, they don't just look for anyone, they look for the people who can make things work again. So no, companies aren't rehiring because they've had some sudden moral awakening. That would be a comforting explanation, but it isn't the accurate one. They're rehiring because the cost of losing capable, experienced people turned out to be higher than they expected. What looked like a clean, efficient decision on paper created consequences that were harder and more expensive to manage in reality. They moved too quickly, they cut too deeply, and once the work itself began to suffer, the impact became impossible to ignore. Productivity slowed, quality declined, and the systems that once ran smoothly started to show strain. At that point, the decision wasn't about principle anymore, it was about correction. So now, they're trying to reverse course, bringing people back, rebuilding teams, and attempting to restore what was disrupted. But that process is rarely seamless. Trust may have been damaged, stability takes time to rebuild, and the cost of that initial decision doesn't simply disappear, it lingers in the background. And all of this leads to a more uncomfortable question, one that sits just beneath the surface of these decisions. If a company can only recognize your value after you're gone, did they ever truly understand it in the first place? Because real understanding isn't reactive, it's consistent. It doesn't wait for absence to reveal importance. When value is only acknowledged in hindsight, it suggests that what was lost wasn't fully measured, or perhaps not fully appreciated, to begin with. And that raises a deeper point about how organizations see their people not just as costs to manage, but as capabilities that sustain everything else.